Ken, welcome to the show. I appreciate you coming.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, totally. So let's just dive right in. I know you have a lot of experience in the bail and legal industry. Why don't you give us the long story short version of who you are, who you're involved with, and how you ended up as one of the leading voices on bail issues?
Uh, Good question. So I've been over an attorney for over 35 years. I started out practicing law, representing doctors in hospitals when they got sued. I was on court TV early on in my career, in a case that we won. I argued my first case at the Supreme Court of Texas as a four-year lawyer, on a medical malpractice issue. I've always had an interest in appellate law, so I've always had a legal argument mind. And so there was a bail bondsman that had some default judgments and so needed help. And so someone told him that you need to hire an appellate attorney, and they suggested they hire me. And I would say that's how I started down this road. So was successful there, word of mouth spread, people, other bondsmen needing help. Then I became Texas counsel for several insurance companies. Um, and then on the issues of what I speak out about, I um, went to a hearing in Houston at a federal court on a case that's been cited across the country as the leading case, or one of the leading cases. I got very concerned when I walked out of that hearing that the court was wrong on many issues. So I decided we had to become experts on those issues, and if we didn't, then nobody would. And I think I've been proven correct because I think that judge has been reversed seven or eight or more times on that case, and ultimately the Fifth Circuit said that case should have never been filed in the federal courts to begin with. And even though it was cited for a lot of authority across the country, all those points have been reversed.
Okay, so let's start from the very beginning. For listeners that might not understand how this works, when someone gets arrested, what happens? Why don't you just walk us through how the traditional cash bail system works?
Well, I would say let's just start with what the criminal justice system works, and that is you are arrested. Probably the majority of the arrests in Texas are done on a probable cause affidavit. So a policeman goes, law enforcement goes before a judge with an sworn affidavit saying, I need a warrant. The judge reviews it and determines whether it meets the requirements in their minds for issuing a warrant. They usually they'll issue a warrant if they believe it does, and it's a warrant for the arrest of, you on the allegations that you've committed a crime. And so that warrant gets distributed, and let's say you are on a traffic stop. So you're caught for speeding, and when they're reviewing your driver's license, they see that there's a warrant for your arrest. And so you're taken to the closest magistrate in your area, wherever you're arrested, irrespective of where the warrant comes from. And you're taken to the local jail, and then they will determine what happens next. You'll go before a magistrate. And so even though charges have not been filed, you have to be admitted to bail, and that can be a personal bond, it can be cash bond in Texas, or it can be a private surety bond. The job of the judges is to set the amount of bail. And what bail is doesn't have anything to do with presumption of innocence. That's trial. It has everything to do with what assurance that you're going to give, that you're going to return to court to answer the charges against you. And then once they set bail, then the question is, can you post it, or is the other county going to come and get you if you can't? If it's a severe charge and you can't afford to post the bond, then the other county may come to get you. If it's a misdemeanor, what I think a lot of people don't realize is um, counties usually they don't cross state lines for misdemeanors for sure. And a lot of times they don't cross county lines for misdemeanors. And so usually you'll just post a bond, which will get forwarded to the other county saying you agree to return or show up for any court date. And then you're waiting in the meantime for whether charges are going to be filed against you. And if charges are filed, then you start the criminal case. But once the judge sets bail, then you get to decide how you're going to post it, and then the judge can also decide whether to give you a personal bond, which is just your personal promise that you'll show up for court.
So the personal bond doesn't include any sort of a payment or that, security against you not showing up?
Well, so the definition of a personal bond is a bond without surety.
Okay.
But every bond in Texas has an amount to it. So a cash bond for 25,000 has to have 25,000 posted. A surety bond for 25,000 is is the bondsman's promise, like an insurance policy, to pay that amount if you don't show up for court. And a personal bond still would say 25,000, but it's just your promise. And if you've heard stories, I mean, you may remember there's stories in the news about like Philadelphia or Pennsylvania had billions of dollars of uncollected bonds. Those were all the equivalent of personal bonds, just personal promise. Those don't normally get paid or collected.
Okay. That makes sense. So that's the traditional, well, actually, let me back up. Where do bail bondsmen fit in that? I know a lot of people have seen bail bond shops. I've seen bail bond shows on YouTube and TV. I think Patty Mayo, I think is a huge, I've never known if his stuff is real or not, but I see him all over the place. So I know that stuff is out there. What do they do and how do they fit into the whole bail system and the criminal justice system?
Well, in Texas, the bail industry is a very intricate part of the criminal justice system. According to the latest statistics from OCA, probably 83 to 86% of all releases in Texas are by the private industry. Um, so we're responsible. I mean, there's a reason why the bail industry has been around for 200 years. It's because we get people to go to court with the smallest failure to appear rate of any release mechanism. Um, so if you get bonded out by a private surety, you're going to report to them periodically, probably weekly, to let them know where you are, so that because they're responsible for making you for ensuring that you go to court. And if you get a court date, they're going to report it to you. You're going to report it to them. It's a very personal relationship. If you have issues, then you're going to go to them with questions generally, or if you are stupid and don't go to court, they're going to call you and say, "Hey, you missed court. We need to get you back on track. And here's how we do it." So, it's a lot of failure to appears get corrected because of the personal relationship with the bonding company. And so their job is to get you to court. Cases get resolved quicker. And when you get cases resolved, then you decrease the backlog, you give justice to victims, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. So that's the traditional system. Now, what exactly are the reformers, these people pushing things like no cash bail? What are they proposing to replace it with? And in a nutshell, what's their argument for why the old system is broken?
Well, I don't like to say what their arguments are because I would say most of their arguments are awful. And also, what they're proposing to replace it with are experiments. But what they're saying is the existing system is not fair. We need to be more fair. They say that that there's systemic racism, which I think is absolutely not true, especially in our urban areas, because when you're in the urban areas, when the defendant's a minority, usually the bailiff is the same minority, the judge is the same minority, the prosecutor is the same minority, and I just reject the whole thought that there's systemic racism when everybody in the courtroom is a minority group and the defendant's the same minority group. I just reject that categorically. I do think there is a problem, and I think there's a long discussion and explanation for why we have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed by certain minority groups. There's a lot of science on that explains it. It's just that it's not really something that's jazzy, and it's also something that is easy to attack. And so I think that the arguments by the reformers or the activists is like what I like to call them is it started out as all politics, just as a reason to get their supporters out in larger margins to come out and vote. But after the election, nothing changed. It all went back to status quo. And so their supporters started questioning that. Why is everything always going back to the same? So they had to start doing something. And I think the suggestions or reforms that they are proposing are doing nothing but making the system worse. When you have a release mechanism that they're proposing that has a 50 to 60 to 70% failure to appear rate, and the criminal case can't go forward without them, compared to the private industry that has less than a 10% failure to appear rate, you can see very quickly that you're going to need twice the amount of courts to get the same number of cases resolved or more. And it's too expensive. You can't do that. So what do you end up doing? You end up dismissing a bunch of cases. And that's the whole problem with what the reformers are wanting. That's what they want. And when you start dismissing cases with no consequences, criminals see that as a green light to commit more crime. And that's what's happened.
Right. You obviously have whatever you incentivize, you're going to get more of. Whatever you disincentivize, you're going to get less of. I feel like there's a huge gap between, the two sides of the aisle. One of them just does not understand you can't let criminals free and encourage them to do their thing, because then they're just going to go and do it again. And eventually that's going to affect them, I would
Well, but
think.
the activists will never admit they're wrong. And
Right.
that's where we have a problem. You always, when you have two extremes, you always look for a compromise. But when one side of the debate will not admit what they're doing is making the system worse, when one side of the debate will not even acknowledge that they're losing cases. I mean, I wrote a letter to the editor to the Dallas Morning News to respond to a stupid article about from these activists because the argument that they made was every trial court that had looked at their arguments across the country had found the private surety bail system unconstitutional. The problem was that every time that the trial court ruled that way, it was appealed, and every court of appeals that addressed the situation reversed. And that was the part they just kind of left out.
That's very convenient. Very convenient.
Yeah. Well, and I don't have any problems, saying it and then citing the cases that they lost. So, I'll go in with the facts, yeah, but the problem is on this case, and here's the site they lost. And here's on this case, here's the site they lost. And here's the case where they cite and they lost. And all three cases or four cases went up to the U.S. Supreme Court and they denied the opportunity to address their argument. So that tells you something.
Yeah, it doesn't get much more clear than that. So there is a case that brought this issue to kind of national attention last year. Irina Zrutska, she's 23 years old. She fled the Russian invasion of Ukraine. She was working in a pizzeria in Charlotte and riding the light rail home, and she was stabbed to death by DeCarlos Brown Jr., who is a man with a criminal history going back to 2007. So how does the bail reform initiatives with, this no cash bail and things like that, how does that tie into this case? How on earth does a man like that end up on a public train and a- able to do something like that?
Well, you start with we have a mental health crisis going on in the country, and we've had that going on for a long time. And we have moved a lot of our mental health facilities into our criminal justice system. Our largest mental health facilities are the jails, the prisons. But because of this movement for reform, we don't want to put everybody in jail, or we don't want to put criminals in jail, I guess. So we've used the brand of a mental health issue as a grounds to dismiss the criminal case. The problem is since we've moved all the facilities for mental health care into the prison system, you're just dismissing the case and releasing someone with mental health issues back onto the street, and it becomes a revolving door. So they come into the jail, they get on their medications, they get controllable, they get released from the jail, they get off their medications, they get uncontrollable, and then they get in trouble and they get arrested. And so, but also on top of that, our criminals are smart. Career criminals, if they can figure out that the mental health argument is a grounds to get your case dismissed, because mental health workers are taught you don't question what they say, you support it. So when they say they have a mental health problem, you support it. You don't triage it to see if they're lying because they want to get their criminal case dismissed. And so then you've got the whole problem of people learning to game the system to get their criminal case dismissed. And so that's a growing pain that we have with this reform movement with the activists, that they were very Pollyanna and still continue to be, because they say, well, we don't need these people in the criminal justice system. Well, we don't have any other way to treat them because that's the way we've been treating them for the last probably 20 years or more, because our private mental health facilities have been closed because they don't really have a constituency to argue for funding. And so whenever there was a budget crisis, that's the first place that got their budget cut from the counties. And there were examples from many, many years ago where they didn't have enough money for even drugs for their care, but also food. And so we had people starve to death in mental health facilities. And so that resulted in class action lawsuits being filed across the country. And so ultimately that led to the closure of a lot of mental health facilities. And then Reagan closed the federal ones. And then, it just kind of went down from there. And so as a result, the mental health treatments have been largely taken over by the jails and by the prisons. And so there's not anywhere to treat them now. And Trump's even said, well, he'd be in favor of bringing those back. They still have the same systemic problems. They don't have a constituency to argue for their budget long term.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a little terrifying, definitely, to know that when the system is broken like that, you just got people just walking around like,
Hmm.
how long is it going to be before the next Irina Zarutska? Because
Yeah.
if they're just letting people out like that, if the system is not working the way it's supposed to work, you've got people who are walking around, you don't know it, but they're mentally ill or they're a career criminal and they have no problem, doing very
Well,
insane
and
and
even
heartless
his mom
things.
said, he should not have been released from jail.
Right.
I mean, now the charge that he was out on at the time he stabbed this woman was, bugging the 911 operators or harassing them. And so I'm not going to say that's a charge where he should have been kept in jail. But the problem with him, his criminal history was long enough where he was in jail, he served time. And so there were charges before that one where he should not have been released. And the problem that we're doing right now, even with the activists under what they're saying, are their proposals. If you've got mental health issues, then you're released until you commit a really serious crime. And then it's serious enough that the public won't stand for it. So then they agree you have to be held. This is the same person they claim had a mental issue that should have, King's X the criminal case the week before, but now it's politics to the max. It's personal public relations, and so now they don't want them released, or they agree they can't be because it was such a severe crime. It's not an answer. They really have no proposal for handling mental health. The mental health treatment facilities are very, very expensive, and the beds and the number of beds you can have will always have a long waiting list for a private system, and also problems with payment.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I have to confess, I've never thought about it quite that way before. It's never occurred to me that the problem might be a lot of the mental health thing, but now that I hear it, it makes perfect sense. It's like, yeah, if the system is broken, it's broken like that, and with mental, yeah, it's
Well,
kind of
but
a
you're
scary
also,
prospect.
whenever you start looking at issues like that, then you understand why the whole California problem is going on the way it is,
Right.
because they attacked their prison population through their inability to provide medical care to the number of inmates they had. I mean, so when they sued California to cap their prison population, it was based on the argument, well, they can't provide medical care for the people they have. And the problem with that is when the courts agreed with them and made a cap, well, they didn't say, well, just release the one with medical issues. It was a across the board release. So then it's all a pretext. And so when it got to the U.S. Supreme Court, the minority, which would be the majority today because of changes in the court, but the minority was saying that whenever you release a brigade of the equivalent of a brigade of criminals into the public, then the only result you get is historically is more crime. And they said that was what would happen. And so uh, I think that case would have a different result if it went to the Supreme Court today, because the minority is now the majority at the U.S. Supreme Court, but it would never go back. And and the reason why we have problems in California is because they refuse to build additional capacity in their prison system.
Right. Yeah, I live in California and I know people who work in the prison system and are, guards and not like higher ups, but people who are
Hmm.
supervisors in prisons and they have said just over and over again the system is buckling. It is completely
Yeah,
overloaded. They can't handle anything, but then their solution is just to release a ton of the people
release more people. Yeah,
and put them out into the public where they're going to cause more
yeah.
danger. It's like,
Well,
okay,
and
that's
Arnold
not a solution.
Schwarzenegger set aside money to build additional prisons, and it never got approved. And then you've got all these statutes that are being passed that are saying we're going to release more prisoners, but it's going to make us safer. Well, releasing prisoners has never made us safer, and the government's terrible at doing individual assessments on whether you've become a productive or will become a productive citizen on release. So they just do across the board, and we know what happens with across the board releases. We just get more crime.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So North Carolina, after the Irina-Zuritsky thing, passed Irina's law, which it restricts cashless bail and it tightens pretrial release conditions, if I'm understanding it correctly. So in your assessment, do you think that law is actually going to help fix the core problem, or do you think it's kind of just a band-aid and there's deeper issues that need to be fixed?
I think it's a starting point. I think they'll come back and address some additional issues. So they address the release mechanism that he had for the person, that was, that he was out on bond. I think that there are some additional things, like Texas has limited the use of personal bond simple release for violent offenders. I think you'll see more of that. But I would call it a beginning point, a start.
Okay. So critics of your position will sometimes say that cases like Irina's are high-profile exceptions, and that statistically most defendants released pretrial don't reoffend, which I'm not sure how much I believe that. But how would you respond to that argument? Do you think the data there is being used honestly, or is it being, kind of twisted and manipulated?
Well, I think you got to the very point of it. I think we haven't had an honest debate in a long time in our country about crime statistics, because I think the most historically the best sources for crime statistics are the police or law enforcement, and these groups just laugh at when they release their crime statistics and they go, "You can't believe that. That's the police department." And so I think these groups are very well organized and they're very good at producing pseudoscience, cooked where they cook the books, and they say crime is not up. I mean, I was looking at that for a year before the election, and they always ended their articles the same way. You don't have to believe us that crime is not going up. Just look at the FBI statistics. And so in October of last year, I wrote an article about why the FBI statistics were not accurate, because they were updating their system. You had to buy new equipment. The two largest law enforcement agencies in the country were not even reporting to the new system. And I think it was coincidental, but 10 days later, after my article was published, the FBI statistics were updated and suddenly showed crime was increasing. And it was because probably more law enforcement agencies were enrolling using the new equipment. And so it's still, incomplete, but they stopped talking about crime in the presidential election a month before the election when that happened. And they started talking about Trump is Hitler, Trump is a fascist, because they couldn't talk about crime anymore. And so I think that, and then within a week, one of these groups published an article saying, well, okay, our reforms, our proposals, we're not the reason why crime was going up. Yeah. I mean, you had a whole week to do your study and do your analysis and issue this report. But yeah, I think these groups have learned how to flood Google. So when you do an AI search, they're not really spitting back the science, they're spitting back the pseudoscience studies. And the reason why I know that is you ask Google about defunding the police, they'll talk about, all the benefits that could be done with taking this money, that funding the police and putting it in social justice programs. The problem is there's been studies on defunding the police. When you defund the police, the first thing that happens is the murder rate goes up, and then crime in general skyrockets. And if you want murder rates to go down, you got to hire this many more police. And so that's settled science, but not to the activists.
Right. I think this reminds me of the stuff that's been going on in New York with Mamdani. I was just reading an article earlier today that was talking about how he's working on, surreptitiously, because he doesn't say this openly, but it's clear what his intentions are, surreptitiously kind of starting to scale back the police department and bring in this new Office of Community Safety, which
Yeah.
consists of, response teams that are like paramedics and mental health workers and
Hmm.
social workers. And they're supposed to show up to a bunch of calls that the police need
Yeah.
to show up to.
Yeah.
That could very well be dangerous calls. And I'm like, I can see a lot of ways that's going to go wrong. As if New York already didn't have enough crime.
Well, but who's going to triage those?
Right.
I mean, who's going to triage those calls to decide whether to send law enforcement or whether to send a social worker or whether to send a medic? I mean, the places where they've attempted it, they ultimately send everybody, so you got to have law
Right.
enforcement there, because what are you going to do when things go wrong? Because, do you think, well, New York will do that until they have somebody killed, probably pretty quickly, and then they'll get sued for sending a social worker to a knife fight, or a gunfight. And it just sounds good, but it's not good science. It's not good for public safety. It's just, again, the activist putting up silly stuff. I mean, it's really all about we know how to fight crime. We know exactly what to do, and they do too. And so they're putting up roadblocks to prevent us from fighting crime.
Yeah. So supporters of no cash bail, and this is we've already sort of touched this a little bit, but supporters will say they'll point to Illinois Safety
Safe,
Act, I believe it's
Safety Act.
called, which eliminated cash bail in 2023, and they say that crime didn't go up after that. What do you think about that claim? Is that a legitimate model? Do you know if there are statistics there that are being kind of selectively applied, just like you were talking about a second ago, or what's your take?
Well, okay. So first of all, let's talk about what the Safety Act did. So, um, the private surety bail system was not part of the Chicago, Illinois model before the Safety Act. They had already gotten rid of the private industry probably 10 or 15 years before that, and crime had already been increasing. We started having these stories about how many people get killed during a weekend. It's ridiculous. So what was left at the time of the Safety Act were cash bonds. So if you posted either the full amount of the cash or you paid the premium to the court, and so the courts were relying upon the cash as a part to fund operations, a part of their operations. So they were relying upon people's failures to appear to fund part of the courts. How successful has that been? The Cook County clerk has issued a report saying that there's been 75% failure to appear rate using the system that was created by the Safety Act. Now, a 75% failure to appear rate on 1,000 people in a week that are supposed to show up for court, that means 750 people didn't show up. That means 750 cases got put on hold and 1,000 new cases were added to the system in the next week. 750 didn't show up. And so you can see very quickly that that shuts down the system, creates backlogs, huge backlogs, and puts tremendous pressure to dismiss cases. Uh, dismissing cases is a green light to commit more crime. We've already had that problem in Illinois for a long time because our inner city in Chicago was kind of like run by the gangs, and they were having to discount crime to get people to go to court, which discounting crime means they give you a softer sentence to get your case resolved as an incentive. So what other incentives are you going to give them? Well, they're just not going to show up because the chickens are running the chicken coop in Chicago. That's really what's going on.
Okay. Yeah,
And so,
that
no, the Safety Act is a complete failure. I think the science is starting to show that. And what was the activist response when the Cook County clerk said they got a 75% failure to appear rate? Oh, no, no, that's just wrong. Well, we're starting to see a whole bunch of different areas that have a 75, 80% failure to appear rate. And Chicago, Cook County's not the only one.
yeah. Very convenient that as soon as, statistics show up to disprove their position, oh, it's wrong. It's something's wrong there,
Well,
within
they
as soon as
just say out of hand. They just wave it off. They don't even
yeah,
give it they won't even say, well, assuming it's correct, we need to look at these things. They just ignore it. And that's how you know that they don't care. I mean,
right,
that's their goal is this reform um, to assuage their supporters because, they're telling them that they're being mistreated by the criminal justice system as a reason to vote for them.
right. It's all power game. That's what it comes
It's
down
all
to.
politics.
Yeah,
It's too politics, too much politics. I mean, we're always going to have politics in the criminal justice system. We're always going to have politics in everything. But this has become the extreme. Both parties have historically been law and order parties. Right now, we're repeating the same cycle we did in the 60s. We were feeling safe in the 60s, so we're more forgiving. And we started having more crime, and the two parties couldn't agree what to do with it. So we had a backlash, and we had Reagan elected with the war on drugs. We're doing the same thing. I would say Trump 2.0 was elected mostly because of immigration policy, but also because of crime. And so I think the backlash has begun again.
yeah. It turns out voters don't actually like, the 7 people getting killed in a weekend in Chicago.
Or
And
20, or
or 20,
yeah.
right. I haven't
I
even
mean,
looked. I haven't even looked at a lot of the statistics, but I remember hearing that number once and being shocked. 20 is even crazier. That's like, okay.
Well, but the problem is we've got both extremes. So when the pendulum swings too far to the left and we're soft on crime, the public will not stand for that. But when the pendulum swings too far to the right and we want to hold everybody to wait trial, the public won't pay for that. So we've got to find the happy medium. The happy medium is reliance more on the private industry and also a strong level of accountability. So if you fail to show up, you've got to explain why you didn't show up for court. And if you don't have a good reason, then you're going to be sitting in jail till your case comes up for resolution. What we're seeing now from the activists is a push to say, well, you should only be able to consider the willful failure to appear by the defendant, which means they intended not to come instead of they were too stupid, they overslept. And the problem with that is both does the same amount of damage to the criminal justice system. And no, do you think, everybody has a Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate themselves? How many other people are going to say they intended intentionally not to come to court?
Right.
None.
Yeah,
None.
no, that's
So,
crazy.
yeah, so it's just a name game, a word game by the activists to try to uh, put roadblocks on when somebody fails to show up for court. And we can't have that.
Yeah. So going back to, we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but there's an argument that I've heard before that cash bail is fundamentally unjust because it means a poor person gets locked up and a rich person goes free for the same crime because one person can pay it, another person can't. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think I assume you don't put any weight into that at all, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I don't know if I have a good response to that. I mean, I should have a good response to that. So let me say that I do reject the argument,
Right.
but I reject it for a couple of reasons. Number one, these simple release mechanisms, whatever they're called, we call them personal bonds in Texas. In California, we call them release on zero bail. In New York, we call it release on no bonds. I mean, those have to be an option because of the Constitution. We have to protect people who are poor. But as the cases have said, being poor is only one consideration. It's not the entire consideration. So if you've got a long criminal history and you're in jail and they set a bond at the amount an amount that you cannot afford, you're not in jail because you're poor. You're in jail because you have a long criminal history. And so I think when people say we've got, just because we have a bail system that charges money, that doesn't mean it's taking advantage of the poor. And I would say there's a statistic, or we're starting to get some really good data from from COVID. But there was a study done in Yolo County, California, where they compared two people released for nonviolent offenses, one on a private surety bond and the other released on a simple release. The person released on simple release, nonviolent offense, had an 200% greater chance of committing a new violent offense in the next 18 months. Now, that statistic is damning. I mean, if I'm a family member, I don't want anyone in my family released on simple release because that increases their chances of being in a worse situation by 200% in the next 18 months. And I think that's really the reasons why the private surety bail system's been around for 200 years. I mean, it does one thing, it does it really well. It gets people to go to court, it gets cases resolved the quickest. And so I would say to the people who are listening to these talking points that the bail industry or bail system takes advantage of people who are poor, I would say, no, that's absolutely not true. We get people through the system quicker than anything, and we keep and give them the best opportunity for the best result. And to the extent where I would be wanting to, if I was the government, I would say, I'm going to pay the premium to get somebody out of jail in the private industry instead of these silly programs that put them in worse positions than they are before. And with all these fraud allegations that are going around, you kind of wonder if, are these free release programs just another opportunity for fraud?
Right. Yeah, no, it's been crazy watching all that blow up, and I don't think anything's out of the question. Anything's like, and nothing's safe now. Now you look at it, and you're like,
There's news today out of Ukraine saying that, all the money that was being given to Ukraine, or some money from the U.S., they were trying to kick it back through NGOs into Biden's presidential reelection campaign. Now, wow, wow.
Yeah, that's pretty representative of what like that's what half of America supports. They support they support somebody who would get into office and do that. It's insane. It's literally insane. It's and I don't yeah, definitely nothing is out of the question. Watching a lot of what Nick Shirley has done in Minnesota and then now in California,
California, yeah.
where it's like apparently 100 times worse here because like him and Benny Johnson, someone else, I forget who, were talking about how I think it might have been James O'Keefe. We're talking about how it's like in Minnesota, it's like daycares. In California, it's daycares and it's voter fraud and it's some sort of other ID fraud and it's senior assisted living fraud
Yes.
and it's
Mhm.
just it is so rampant. It's like you know, this is what we get. That we've had a liberal in office for a very long time. Our legislature is extremely skewed to the left, and they're super soft on crime. They're trying to do stuff like no cash bail, and this is what it gets us.
Yeah, but in California, even when they proposed no cash bail, there was a statewide referendum, and the public rejected it. And so they're trying to do it in contravention of what the public voted for. And so
Right,
they know better than the public. And so whenever they're doing that, I mean, and also their system would set up a statewide new infrastructure that would require new employees. So you have a new union. And I mean, I would say California is run by the unions to a certain extent. But when you add this fraud element to it too, I mean, doesn't this just make the United States look like a third world country? Because third world countries can't run themselves because of all the fraud. And I'm like, well, it seems like we've kind of gotten there in some of our Democrat locations where, these programs. I mean, y'all have got examples of billion-dollar debacles set up for uh, the homeless that have never really gone anywhere and now are under court supervision. And then everybody just runs and says, well, now I didn't vote for that, or, blah, 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 blah. I mean, everybody just starts hiding, but where did the money go? I mean, it just
right.
all went to vanish. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's pure insanity. It's crazy these people are even in office. So if you could, well, I know we talked a little bit about this with the mental health thing, but if you could wave a wand and implement what you call, just success, your version of successful bail reform. So
Mhm.
whether that's a return to the traditional or whether that's something else, what does that look like? What's your vision for a perfect bail system?
I would say that we're always looking for ways to improve the criminal justice system, but I think that a good bail system is one that is grounded in accountability. So my perfect system would rely more heavily on the private sector because it's the only release mechanism that has a low failure to appear rate. Everything else has a terrible failure to appear rate, so they're just experiments. You've got to have those as a failsafe for first-time offenders, but I'm not even sure I would want a first-time offender if I was a family member released on just personal release or simple release. But I would have a strong level of accountability. Even if you're going to try those things, I mean, we've got examples in Houston, Texas, where they're doing simple release on misdemeanors, where people didn't show up for court 17 times, and they just keep getting released 17 times on the same bond. Now, you and I would say two strikes you're out, okay? But I mean, let's just say five times. I mean, at a certain point, you've got to admit that it didn't work, and so we've got to try something else. And so, but I think there's a really good case out there that explains when I'm talking about accountability what I mean, because we know how to fight crime, but there was Sanchez versus Alabama. A sheriff was sued, and he was placed. Their county was placed under a preliminary injunction. They had to live under it for 4 years while they appealed. They had to release everybody. They couldn't hold anyone. It was just simple release, run amok. And the sheriff said, I'm not settling. This is not right. And so it went all the way to the Court of Appeals. And I think it was the 10th or the 11th Circuit, and they reversed. And so I talked to him and he said, look, we re implemented our system of accountability. We let the criminals know that if they didn't do what they were supposed to do, there would be accountability, there would be consequences. And what do you know? Within around 6 months, the crime rate started going down. So I would, let good cops do what good cops do. I would set up systems that would get the cases through the system as quickly as possible to give justice to victims, and either, people who are accused of crimes would either get released for being found not guilty, or they would get convicted and they would start serving their time or having their consequences. And so I would have a strong dose of accountability.
Yeah. Again, you incentivize what you want more of and disincentivize what you want less of. Doesn't seem
Yeah,
like it
but the
should be.
whole concept of the activist is you can give the criminals what they want, and that will make us safer, and that's just contrary to common sense. And they'll
Right.
say, well, let me give you all these statistics, and they'll say how recidivism won't go up, and we'll show you how they're cooking the books on their recidivism. And where the best example I have of that is there's in misdemeanor courts in Houston, Texas, they're doing a lot of the simple release, and there's a monitor who's issuing reports every 6 months, and they just fail to acknowledge that the prior DA issued a report on how this system is creating substantial recidivism problems. They just dismissed it out of hand. Well, that happens across the country in these areas where they'll issue their reports saying, "Oh, it's not impacting recidivism." They won't say crime is going down. They'll just say, "Well, crime is not going up." No, no, no. And they're playing games with the numbers, and they just sound so smart. They're paying off people with large sums of money to issue reports that say crime isn't going up. And the best thing they do, or the best thing I've seen them do, is they'll say, "Well, we released 20% more people from the jail, and so on a proportionate basis, crime is the same." Well, you release it 20% more, so crime is going to go up. But on a proportionate basis, crime has stayed the same. Now, that's calling the day, night, night, day in my book.
Yeah, no, they're just messing around and they clearly have no intention to actually protect any of their constituents or do anything serious about the problem.
That's
So
right.
for a listener who wants to actually do something about this and, get involved, whether it's in California or North Carolina or New York or wherever it is, what should they be pushing for at like the local level or the state level? Should we call representatives? Should we call county commissioners, sheriffs? What should we be doing to help fight this?
Well, I think we have an election coming up in November. We have a very good opportunity to vote law and order. As I've said earlier, historically, both national parties have been law and order parties. We've had one other situation where the parties got out of sync in the 60s, and it took us a couple of national elections where people voted law and order for that to reset. I think we need one more national election where people vote law and order candidates, and I think then both national parties will reset to be law and order parties. If people want more information about me or my group, they can go to pbtx.com, the professional bondsmen of Texas.com. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories. We also have our own podcast. There's a link on the menu, or you can go directly to thebellpost.com. All we do is talk about criminal justice issues, what works, what doesn't work. We're ranked in the top 10 of criminal justice podcasts on the internet, which I don't know if that's a big audience, but it's a specialized audience. We're a resource for legislatures to try to get through the buzz. And when activists tell them that cutting law enforcement will decrease crime, we'll show them the science that says you're just guaranteeing that your murder rate's going to go up.
All right, perfect. I will put all those links down in the description. So for anyone watching this who wants to go support Ken and follow him everywhere, definitely do that. And make sure to vote in the upcoming election. Make your voice heard. And Ken, thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.